remember your name. That's good for me. This is David Jones from the Maine State Retirement System, and he's here to talk to teachers about their retirement plan. So there's great interest here as we do about retirement. So he's here to help us along that path.
That works perfect. Thank you very much. All right. As you said, my name is David Jones. I'm the teacher plan specialist. First, I want to get everyone out here on time today. So if you have individual take questions, please do hold them to the end. I will stay and you can ask me questions as long as you want. That said, I do welcome questions for clarification during the presentation. So if I said something unclear, please feel free to ask a question. If you have to tell me your entire 30-year career history, that's probably a better question for the end. So the other thing I want to say before I get started, on the right side of the folder, you'll actually have a copy of the PowerPoint. So if you pick the one seat that's going to be completely blocked by me the entire time, you'll still be able to see it. It's hopefully a good place to go. So what am I going to talk about today? First, we use a lot of jargon at Maine First. So we're going to start today by just covering a couple of the common terms, real basic. Hopefully that will improve your understanding on the back end. Then we're going to get to the real big questions, what everyone is here today for, which is, when can I retire, and how much are you going to pay me? So we'll cover the big ones. We'll also talk about retiring and returning to work, and then we'll finish today by talking about some of the basic, some of the other programs that are available to us Maine First member you might not be even sure of. So, for those of you just joining, you have not missed anything of consequence, I promise you. One thing you really want to know is the right-hand side, it has the PowerPoint presentation in that folder there. Yes,
okay, so the packets are different. We received a packet in the other room that is for... The packets are different?
There are some very slight differences to the packets. The presentation will have some differences as well. So you want to get one of the ones here if you can.
Maybe I'll see the packet.
Everyone has one of these packets. Did you get one on the way in? One of these?
We grabbed some.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. All right, let's go ahead and get started then. First, Maine First is a defined benefit plan. And what does that mean to you? It means it's a retirement plan sponsored by your employer, which will guarantee you a lifetime monthly benefit. And that benefit is a guaranteed amount. So you've worked, you tell me how many years you've worked and what you earned during those years, I can tell you what that lifetime guaranteed benefit amount is. Now that's different from a defined compensation plan, where the amount you put in is subject to the outcomes of the market. You don't have that affecting your plan. Your plan is just the years you worked, the amount you earned, guaranteed lifetime monthly benefit. Now, the first question you want to be asking yourself when you start thinking about retirement is, what is my normal retirement age? There are 3 different normal retirement age plans in the state of Maine. There is an age 60 plan, an age 62 plan, and an age 65 plan. Now, what determines which plan you're covered under is the amount of creditable service you have at one of 2 magic dates in history. If you had at least 10 years of creditable service by June 30th of 1993, you will be covered under the age 60 plan. If you had fewer than 10 years by June 30th of 1993, but you had at least 5 years by June 30th, 2011, you will be under the age 62 plan. And if you have fewer than 5 years by June 30th, 2011, you'll be under the age 65 plan. Now, normal retirement age is the age at which you can first draw a benefit from the retirement system without an age reduction. More on that later. once you are a vested member. Well, what does it mean to be vested? Vested simply means that when you have reached normal retirement age, you qualify to start drawing a benefit at that time. To be vested, you only need 5 years of creditable service in the system. I'm assuming everyone here is actively working. There's no exceptions that we need to talk about. Everybody work today?
Yes.
Okay, good, perfect. Now, I know I've said creditable service at least half a dozen times now. What does that really mean? Creditable service is one of the 2 factors we use for calculating that defined benefit amount. In its most basic form, it's a measurement of time. The time you work in a main first covered position. What we call for service is rendered. But there's also a couple other spots where service credit can be granted to you. Where you can have service credit. There's service credit that's granted, which is when the law specifically says this individual can have time on the books, even though they weren't working. The most common example of that is the law says if you go on an unpaid leave of absence during a school year, you can have up to 30 days granted to you. So if you used up your accruals and went off the books for 2 weeks last year, the law gave you that time, so there's no gap in your retirement history. There is also what we call purchased service. You can actually buy time in some instances. Now, oftentimes people will come up to me and say, well, I want to buy 3 years so I can get done right now. Doesn't quite work that way. You have to have what we call a purchasable event. So there's specific reasons you can buy time. You can't just buy time for the sake of buying it. We will talk about what those purchasable events are here in just a moment. The other factor for calculating your retirement defined benefit amount is your average final compensation. Now, your average final compensation is the average of your 3 highest years of earnings. Many of you, that's going to be your last 3 years because you've been on a structured contract, making a little bit more each year, but it doesn't have to be. If 10 years ago you were working as an administrator, you're now back in the classroom making less, we will go use those high years. So the highest 3 years of earnings, wherever they occur in your career, they don't even need to be consecutive, we will find and use them. Now, I should say when I talk about the high 3-year average, it's the high 3 years of earnable compensation. Not every dollar that your school district pays you gets factored into your retirement. Earnable compensation in its most basic form is the payment you receive for the services you render in your main first covered position, whether it's paid hourly, daily, salary. Now, overtime pay, longevity pay, those are all common examples of things that are earnable for your retirement benefit. But there are some exclusions in the law, including the common ones listed there. First, bonuses, which aren't really common anymore. But if you do get a bonus, great, take the money, just know it's not going to increase your retirement benefit. Next one listed down, accrual cash-ins. So if at the end of every school year your contract says, we'll buy back 2 unused sick days, again, great, take the money, it's yours, just don't expect it to increase your retirement benefit. Last one listed there, cash in lieu of benefits. Some school contracts will say, if you don't take health insurance with the district, we'll give you $2,000. Again, it's your money, take it, just not going to increase your retirement benefit. Cost of living adjustments. For cost of living adjustments, there's 2 big things you want to walk away knowing. First, when are you going to be eligible to receive a cost of living adjustment? And second, once you are eligible to receive it, what is the amount you'll be paying? First, to be eligible to receive a cost of living adjustment, you must have been retired for a full 12 months when it's granted. Cost of living adjustments are always granted in September of a given year. Many of you will retire from the system July 1st, which is the point we'll talk about again today. And then September 1st, 2016 rolls around, you've only been retired 2 months, you're not yet eligible. We wrap around the calendar, September 2017, you now have more than 12 months in, you are eligible, unless you are covered under the age 62 or the age 65 plan, and you retired before normal retirement age. If you are under normal retirement age under those plans, you'll have to wait until you reach normal retirement age and then count the 12 months from there. So using the 62 plan as an example, if you retire when you're only 61 years old, you then have your 62nd birthday, then the 12-month count would start. Now that's not true if you're under the age 60 plan. Under the age 60 plan, you can retire at 58, first 12 months still do count. Now, you're eligible. What's that going to mean for you? The amount is dependent on the Consumer Urban Pricing Index, what the return was from that year. It can be up to 3% of that amount. So if the index returns 4% for the year, you're not going to see more than 3%. And it's based on a base figure. Now the base started at $20,000, but each year a cost of living adjustment has been granted on that base. The base continues to rise. Best way to use an example, let's pretend the first year the base was $20,000 and you had the full 3% increase, which is $600. The next year, the calculation would be based off of $20,600. So what is granted that year is added to the base calculation for next year. Currently, the cost of living adjustment is just under $21,000, and it will continue to rise as cost of living adjustments are granted. So by the time you're actually retiring and eligible, it will have continued to rise from today's conversation. Now, earlier I said there were some times where service can be granted to you by law, even though you weren't working. I did use the first example listed there for unused unpaid time. I will add at this point, that's based, the 30 days is based on being a full-time status employee when you went out on that leave. If you were a part-time individual, that would have been prorated. So if you were a half-time employee, you could have up to 15 days of service granted to you. Another spot where service can be granted to you is if you go on if you went on a military leave of absence, if you return to main first covered employment within 90 days, you are discharged other than dishonorably, you can be eligible to have up to 5 years of service granted at no cost to you. If you meet those criteria, or if you think you might, send us a copy of your DD-214 and we'll be able to confirm what's available for you. Another spot where service credit can be granted even though you weren't working is if you go out on a workers' compensation leave. If you're out on a workers' compensation leave, since 2004, it's actually been mandatory that you pay in your retirement contributions to the system, just like you would have if it was a regular paycheck. The good news is because you're submitting contributions to the system, you continue to receive that creditable service, and there's no gap in your history. We then start talking about purchasable events, those opportunities to buy service. Listed on here are the more common versions, more common types available to our members. The first listed there is active duty military service. Now, you might not be eligible to have the service granted to you. Maybe you weren't back within that 90-day window I mentioned earlier. But there are other provisions for buying military service as well, including one at a subsidized rate, which will be significantly cheaper. Again, send us a copy of your DD-214, and we'll let you know what's available for you. Next listed on there is if you previously refunded your main first service, you can buy that time back. So let's say you were 25 years old, just finished working your first year in the state of Maine, decide to heck with the snow, I'm going to refund my account, put it in my gas tank, and drive to California. Well, you can buy back that time you took off your account earlier. Now, the catch is, it's not just the $500 you took out in 1989 to buy it back. It's $500 plus the interest it would have accrued since it was on account at MainPers. So the cost, if it was 30 years ago, will be a little more significant. With that said, feel free to give us a call and ask us to quote you what that cost is. There's no obligation to you to buy, so if you want to look to consider, is it worth purchasing for me, give us a call, we'll give you the information so you can make that decision. Another type of purchasable service is out-of-state service. Let's say when you left the state of Maine, you went to Massachusetts contributing into their state retirement system. You can buy that time from Massachusetts up here in Maine, as long as you're not using it to draw a benefit in Massachusetts. So you don't get to draw a benefit from Massachusetts and Maine on the same year, but you can buy that time up here if you so choose. The last one listed there is becoming less common. Non-contributory service is if you were in a position that should have or could have been main PERS covered, and you were not being reported into the retirement system. Perhaps it was an error, perhaps it was optional. You can always give us a call and we'll be able to let you know if that's available to you. A few others that are less common but worth noting, just so if you hear them, you know to give us a call and ask what's available for you. If you were teaching in a parochial school or a private academy, if you were teaching the children of U.S. Armed Forces personnel, if you were in the Volunteers in Service to America, the Fulbright Exchange Program, Peace Corps, I know it's from England, or any Head Start service in the state of Maine. If any of those ring a bell to you, you want to give us a call and we'll let you know how much it would cost and what's available to you. All right, we're through the dry stuff. And I say that knowing we're talking about retirement, so it's still going to be dry. But we're now to the, oh thank you. We're now to the bigger pieces. One of the most common things people ask is, I have all of these accrued days on the books at retirement, what's that going to do for me? When we start talking about accrued days at retirement, it's going to break down into two categories. Days that your employer will pay you out, and days they won't pay you out. Now, we're going to start with the perfect example. Let's say you have 120 days accrued on the books, and your contract says your employer will pay you out for 30 days. That will leave you with 90 unused, unpaid days. You can receive service credit on up to 90 unused, unpaid days. So if you go and retire and you have 25 years on the books, so you work 25 full years, plus you have 90 unused days, you'll actually get an additional 0.35 of a year of service credit. So it would appear as if you retired with 25.35 years of service. More service means a higher benefit amount, so that's a good thing. Now, that amount is prorated. So if you have fewer than the 90 unpaid days, and you only have 45 unpaid, you would get, at 45, you get half of the 0.35 available. So those unpaid days apply to all plans, whether you're under the 60 plan, 62 plan, or 65 plan. We then move over to talk about the paid days. Now, the paid day portion only applies if you are in the age 60 plan. If you are under the 60 plan, the paid days at retirement can be treated as earnable compensation and can be factored into your high 3-year average for determining your average final compensation for your benefit calculation. Now, if you're under the 62 or the 65 plan, it's not earnable compensation for you. It's not going to help you in retirement for the paid days piece. One last thing I want to say about the paid days is that is still subject to the cap provision. We will talk more in a bit on what the cap provision is, but just plant that seed in the back of your mind if you're under the 60 plan. We have now made it to the first of the two big questions, which is, when can I retire? So, when can you retire? You qualify to start drawing a retirement benefit in one of two ways. Either you reach normal retirement age as a vested member, so 60, 62, or 65, depending on your plan, or you accrue 25 years of creditable service. Now, if you think about it, it's distinctly possible to have 25 years well before a normal retirement age. Let's say you started teaching when you were 25 years old, you worked 25 full straight years, You have the 25, so you qualify to start drawing a benefit, but you're, well, there is actually an exception to that. The exception says if you have at least 1 year of creditable service immediately prior to reaching your normal retirement age, you can in fact retire at that point. So if you're 64 years old, you just worked 1 full year and turned 65, guess what? You can actually retire with as little as 1 year. So your benefit won't be very sizable, but if you think it was a mistake, you don't want to go back for another year, you can get out now.
64.
So the 64-year-olds are celebrating. All right. The other thing we want to say is you don't have to work right up until the day you're eligible to draw a benefit. Let's say you're a vested member who's under the 62 plan, only 61 years old, but you have fewer than 25 years, and so you can't draw until you're 62 years old. But you don't want to go back and work another year. You don't have to. You can become what we call an inactive member, which means you simply aren't working in a main PERS covered position, and then you can in fact draw when you reach your normal retirement age. That is to say, you don't have to work to the bitter end to draw a benefit. You can stop working, draw later. All right, average final compensation. A few times for average final compensation now, I've alluded to a cap provision. The information on this slide is great, but for me, I'm a numbers person. I think it makes a lot more sense. So I'm going to talk about this information, but I'm going to talk about it on the next slide so you can follow along on the example. Now, the cap provision limits the increases you can have to your earnable compensation during your high 3-year average. Now, what it says is that from years 1 to 2, or years 2 to 3, you're limited to a 5% increase. In the first year, this member earned $45,000. So going into the second year, they're allowed up to $47,250, 5% above what they had earned the previous year. Now, you'll see they actually earned $48,000, which is $750 in excess of that 5% cap. So the maximum amount allowed under the cap is left in the calculation of the high 3 years. The additional $750 is excluded from the calculation. The law then again applies that 5% cap between years 2 and 3. Now, you will note it's 5% above the amount that was earnable from the previous year, not 5% above the amount that was earned the previous year. So the 5% figure listed here, $49,613, is actually 5% above the $47,250 that was allowed under the cap from the prior year. Now, there is another cap provision that says from the first year to the third year, you are limited to a 10% increase overall. So the first year, the member earned $45,000. 10% above that amount would be $49,500. You will note going into this final year, the 5% and the 10% cap are different. The law says wherever it is the most restrictive, it must be applied, which in this case is the 10% cap. So the 10% cap, $49,500, is allowed into the high 3-year average. The additional $1,500 this member actually earned is excluded from the calculation. Everything that was allowed to stay in that made it under the cap is then added up. They divide that by 3 to get the high 3-year average, listed down below. Now, the note on the bottom there, what that is saying is, Maine PERS recognizes you paid in retirement contributions on those capped out earnings, but those earnings aren't helping you in retirement. So we return the contributions you paid in on those earnings back to you. I recognize that it is a small silver lining, but nobody ever turns down money when I offer it. So we will cut back, that's what the note at the bottom is telling you. We'll pay back the 7.65% of any amount excluded back to you. Now, If you recall when we were talking about those paid sick days for the age 60 plan, I said plant that seed in the back of your mind because it is still subject to the cap provision. What we will often see for individuals under the 60 plan is going between years 2 and 3, let's say they had a 3% raise going into that year, they then get paid this big sick day payment that let's say is 8%. So they're actually seeing an 11% increase into that final year. That 5% cap gets applied, and 6% is actually kicked out. So if you're under the age 60 plan, it's fairly typical to see some of that sick time helping to increase your average final compensation, and then a cap taking out part of it. All right, once we have calculated your average final compensation, we then have the information necessary to calculate that defined benefit amount. We start by taking your average final compensation, and we divide it by 50, which is the same as if we had multiplied by 2%, which is the accrual rate for the teacher plan. You then take that amount and multiply it by your years of creditable service. In the example, the members worked a nice round perfect 25 years, but whatever you've worked is what's going to be there. If you've worked 12 years in the system, 12 years. If you've worked 34 years, 34. That amount will provide you your annual benefit under the full benefit amount, under the full benefit option. We'll touch base on that a bit shortly, at normal retirement age. So this is assuming no age reduction has been applied. If you do retire under normal retirement age, this is how you would calculate the age reduction. Now, first, the age reduction is different for the age 60 plan than it is for the 62 and 65 plan. Under the 62 plan, it's not a flat amount per year. It actually varies. It's usually around 2.25% to 2.5%, but in the first year, it's actually a 2.8% reduction. Now, the inverse of the 2.8% is 97.2%. So if you multiply that 97.2% by the number you just calculated, that would be the amount if you retired at 59 years old under the age 60 plan. And the percentages work their way down the chart from there. Under the 62 and the 65 plan, it is a flat 6% per year. So if you're under the age 62 plan and you retire at age 61, you would have lost 6% off the top of your benefit. Something to note, that age reduction is based on the age you first start drawing a retirement benefit, and it stays with you for life. So you don't want to think, I'm under the 62 plan, I'm going to retire at 61, and in a year that pesky age reduction will go away. It will not. That 6% reduction will stay with you for eternity. So it's based on the age you first start drawing a benefit, and it does stay with you. Now, this is one of the big questions people ask. They say, well, I've heard my friends say I can retire at 59 and a half, 61 and a half, 64 and a half. What that is all about is actually how we apply the age reduction. We round your age to the nearest 6 months. So if you're 61 and 3 months old under the 62 plan when you retire, we would have rounded your age down to 61. You lose the full 6%. If you were to retire when you were 61 and 9 months old, we would have rounded your age up to 62. No age reduction would have applied. So it's really about how the age reduction is applied where that half days come in. Now, what you don't want to think is if you have fewer than 25 years, the age rounding means nothing for you because you still have to qualify to draw the benefit. So if you have fewer than 25 years, your first chance to qualify is when you've reached your full normal retirement age as a vested member. So if you have the 25 years, that's when the age rounding can let you leave early and help you get rid of that age reduction a little bit sooner. Now, the chart on there is letting you know that it's really the first of the month following your and a half birthday that matters. So if you were born in January, let's say you're under the 62 plan, You just had your 61st birthday in January. You'll have your 61st and a half birthday in July. And then the first of the month following is when no age reduction would apply. So you can find your birthday on there and see when that age reduction drops off for you. All right. Now, the amount we calculated, I said, was based on the full benefit option. The full benefit option is the maximum amount you can withdraw from the system based on your years of service and your average final compensation. You can continue to rise that amount as you continue to work, but there are eight other options to choose from in retirement that will provide for a beneficiary or beneficiaries in varying ways. We don't go over them in depth in this presentation. There is information on them in the packets, so you can read up on them. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them. But the reason you want to know about those options and understand how they work is it's a lifetime decision. Once you've retired from the system and you've received your first benefit check, you're going to be locked into that option for life. So you want to get an estimate from us before you retire so you can see what those option amounts are and you can make the decision if this works for me. A couple other things worth mentioning. If you are married and you select full benefits, which doesn't provide for a beneficiary, or you pick one of the options that does have a beneficiary feature and choose someone other than your spouse, part of your application will be a spousal notification form saying you swear you have told them they aren't getting anything. You're not going to be able to sneak that one by. All right, so the retirement process. Let's say you're really fired up now about retirement. You just found out you're eligible and you like the math you did on the benefit calculation. What does it look like between now and sitting on a sunny beach for you? First, you choose a retirement date. There is no point at which MainePers says, hey, you've worked enough, you need to stop. If you want to work 50 years, go right ahead. Work as long as you'd like. 50 won't even set the record for a teacher in our system. So once you decide you're ready to go and you qualify to do so, you can then pick your retirement date. Now, there's 12 different retirement dates in a given year. Your effective date is always the first of the month. And one of the most important things I will tell you today is if you're that teacher who the second or third week of June, you have finished working, you skip out of the doors faster than your students, and you are done for the year. You can retire as early as July 1st. There is a lot of confusion for our teacher members on this. They'll say, well, my contract says I'm an employee through August 31st. Or my school doesn't pay out lump sum in June, so I have payments coming through August 31st. From MainePers' perspective, that makes no difference to us. You completed your contractual obligation when you worked the last day you were required. You can have that as your termination date as long as your employer will provide it. And then you can retire the first of the month following your termination. So a June termination date means you can be eligible to retire as early as July 1st. A retirement check and a paycheck in the same month, it is a beautiful thing. So know that that is out there for you. Now, once you have an idea, if you're thinking about retiring, you want to request an estimate from us up to a year in advance, at least to six to 9 months out, to give yourself time to get the estimate and start thinking over, am I going to be able to afford to retire and get out now? When you get the estimate, feel free to call us, schedule to come into one of our Augusta seminars. There is some overlap from these presentations, but it goes over those options in depth, and then we'll sit and work with you one-on-one to help you fill out the paperwork. Then you have to, or if you don't want to visit me again, that's okay. Call, have us mail you the application. On the application, you'll make that big decision, what option do you want, full benefits or options 1 through 8. You'll check it off, you'll send it in to us. How early should you send it in? We recommend at least 3 months prior to retirement. We will take it in advance up to 1 year. I will also encourage you, if you're thinking about going, file early, because we make it as easy as possible to rescind and change your mind. So if you got really excited today, you go home and you send in an application, and then May rolls around and you think, you know, I'm going to come back for 1 more year, give us a call. You have up until 5 p.m. the day before you receive your first retirement check to change your mind. You can call me at 5 o'clock that day, you won't be setting the record. So you can call and rescind if you change your mind. It's just easier to have the application in than it is to be closing out grades, closing out a classroom, and trying to get me an application in on time. So always early, change your mind later if you need to, that's okay. Once we do have your application on file, we'll process it, we'll send you a letter letting you know when your first check's going to come, and at that point, you're sitting easy. All right, we are now going to talk about what I consider to be the most complicated thing we talk about today, which is retiring and returning to work. I think it is most complicated because there are 3 different sets of provisions, all with their own little nuances. So first, before we jump into that, I want to talk about what's going to be true for all 3 sets. This is just one of the 3. What's true for all 3 sets is you need to wait at least 30 days from your termination before going back to work. You also need to get past your retirement effective date. Now, for many of you, that's going to happen naturally. You'll have terminated the last day you worked, let's say June 15th. 30 days from June 15th gets you past that July 1st effective date. But then there's going to be those of you who are delaying the retirement effective date. You're going to stop working in June, but let's say you're trying to get rid of one of those pesky age reductions, which doesn't go away until October. Now, 30 days from June 15th gets you into July, but it's not past your effective date, which is October 1st. You do not want to go back to work before your retirement effective date. Because what happens to that member who was planning on drawing their benefit in October is they get a call from the school, they say, hey, we're in a jam, can you come and work for a year? And you, being the accommodating, lovely soul that you are, say, sure. And then you start teaching in September, but you're no longer terminated from your main PERS covered position. You're in an active main PERS covered position. And when October rolls around, you're actively working, which means you can't retire. You've pushed back your retirement at least 1 month. And if you're planning on working the full year, you push back your retirement a full year. So that is to say, do not go back to work before your retirement effective date, no matter how far after that is from your termination date. I'm going to add one more wrinkle to this for those people who are waiting till October 1st, which is you especially want to be careful about going back before your retirement effective date, because when we talk about the unused, unpaid sick days and the paid sick days earlier, those are based on your final position with your final employer prior to retirement. So what we see is someone decides to go back and substitute in September, and then they think, okay, I'll sub for a few days, I'll stop working, and I'll be all set to retire October 1st, which you can do, but now those unpaid sick days and those paid sick days are out the window because your final position is now a substitute position, and the subs don't accrue sick time. So please, 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 don't go back to work before your retirement effective date. If you are thinking about it, call me so I can at least explain what will happen, okay? So the last thing that I need to say that is true for all 3 sets of these provisions is we're talking about retiring from a main PERS state or teacher covered position, returning to a main PERS state or teacher covered position. If you go to the federal government, the private sector, another state, you don't have restrictions to worry about at all. So main PERS, if you're retiring from your school district, going back to your school district in your same job, that's going to be covered. Now let's go look at the 3 different sets of restrictions individually. The first set of restrictions is if you are retiring and returning to work under normal retirement age. So if you're under the 62 plan, you have those 25 years and you decide you're going to retire at 61 years old. Now, if you do so, you first engage in conversations with your employer about being rehired until after your retirement. So you can't go and say, Principal Jane, I want to retire from main PERS effective July 1st, but you'll hire me back September 1st, right? That is strictly forbidden. Part of the application process, if you're under normal retirement age, is signing a certified document saying you're in compliance with that, you haven't had reemployment conversations. Next, when you do go back, if you're under normal retirement age, you're limited to working 90 days per school year. Now, you can in fact work beyond 90 days, but once you work your 91st day, your retirement benefit becomes suspended for non-compliance. So if you're under normal retirement age, you want to go back to work the full 180 days, your benefits will stop being paid at day 91. So keep that in mind. Now, for this section, for 8 hours, if you're in an hourly position, will equal 1 day. If you're in a stipend position, let's say coaching softball, then that will count as 60 of those 90 days. The next set of restrictions, number 2 of 3, is if you are now at normal retirement age, so 60, 62, or 65, depending on your plan. And again, wait 30 days, get past your retirement effective date. Now instead of being limited to the number of days you can work in a school year, you're limited to the number of school years you can go back and work in. Now, this is the non-classroom based rules, which means if either the position you retired from or returned to was considered non-classroom based by your employer, that you have these restrictions. So under these restrictions, you're limited to 5 years of restored service. Any amount of work in a school year counts as one of those 5 years. So if you go teach a fall ecology course for 2 months, one of the 5 years of service you're eligible for going back. While you are back, if you fall under this provision, you're limited to earning 75% of the compensation based on the rate of pay. You will note substitutes are excluded from the 5-year limitation and the 75% restriction. They are not excluded from the 30-day wait. Again, wait the 30 days to get past retirement effective date. But if you're subbing and you fall under this set of restrictions, you can sub as many years as you'd like, and you can take the full 100% compensation for the position, the full per diem rate. The third and last set, again, is if you are at normal retirement age, so 60, 62, or 65, depending on your plan. And now, if the position both you retired from and returned to were considered classroom-based by your employer, then you'll fall under the classroom-based restrictions here. Now, the difference from the last set is instead of being limited to 5 years of restored service, you now have up to 10 years of restored service with an individual school administrative unit. And the first 5 of those years, you would actually be eligible to receive 100% of the compensation established for the position. And then in the next 5 years, 6 through 10, you would have the 75% restriction at that point. You will note the very distinct absence of a substitute exclusion. If you fall under this provision as a substitute, those restrictions do apply to you. All right. A lot of different provisions. No, you can give us a call. We can help you understand where it's going to. I do recommend you call before you take the job. It's much nicer to know what will happen than to find out, oh, you just worked your 91st day and now your retirement benefits being suspended. So call us, that's what we're here for. Our number's in that package probably 100 different times. Okay, so just to round out the day, there's a few programs we want to make sure you're aware are available to you as main course members. First, we've been talking about everything going according to plan and you drawing a service retirement benefit from us. As much as that was. The camera's not going to pick up that sound, so I'm going to just look really odd there. Alright, so as odd as it is to think about our own death, it's possible. And if you don't make it to retirement, if you pass away prior to retirement, there are death benefits available to your beneficiary or beneficiary. We don't go over them in detail. What's available varies based on a few things, whether or not it was a workplace-related injury or just what they call an ordinary death. Your status as a member at the time you passed away, and your beneficiary's relationship to you. I would encourage you all, for peace of mind, to contact Survivor Services, to review the information in the packets, or to review the information online so you have an understanding of what death benefits are out there. But know that you are covered in at least some capacity. Again, service retirement is what we've been talking about, but MaineFirst does also offer a disability benefit program as well. Now, our disability program is a long-term program. We don't offer a short-term disability. But if you were thinking, I just told you you needed to wait 3 more years before you were eligible to even retire, and you're thinking, no way in heck I'm going to do that, disability might be the right option for you. Again, give us a call, ask to speak to the disability unit. They will make the entire process as easy as possible for you. So know that that's out there. Lastly, MaineFirst does also administer a group life insurance program, which you may or may not have chosen to participate in. If you are participating in our group life program and you meet these eligibility criteria, then you can carry the basic coverage into retirement at no cost to you. To be eligible, you need at least 10 years of coverage within the plan. Doesn't need to be continuous. As long as you got your 10 years in, you'll be all set there. You also must be carrying the coverage when you go to retire, and your bill needs to be squared up. And then lastly, your retirement effective dates and your completed application must be into MaineFirst within 31 days of your termination of employment. That sounds so mundane, but we're going to pay attention to it for a moment. First, have your application in on time to me. If you're going to retire July 1st, you need to have it in no later than 31 days of July 1st. If you file early like I recommended, you'll be all set. So if you file in March, when July rolls around, you won't have anything to worry about on that front. The other thing though is you have to have your retirement effective date within 31 days of your termination of employment. Now your termination is that magic June date when you last worked, so let's say it's June 15th. Most of you, you'll retire effective July 1st because you listened to me earlier. You'll be within 31 days, you'll be all set. Again, the trouble is always for those who are delaying their retirement effective date. So let's say you're planning on retiring effective September 1st when that pesky age reduction goes away. Well, if you have a June 15th termination date and a September 1st effective date, those are more than 31 days apart. There is, however, some gray area for teacher members whose contracts say they're through August 31st. And if your employer instead gave you an August 31st termination date, well, now you'd be back within that 31-day window and you could keep this benefit. So if you're delaying your retirement benefit, contact us and ask to speak to Survivor Services and check with your employer if they're willing to give you a later termination date to see if you can keep your eligibility for this provision. Why does it matter? Well, it's a pretty good chunk of money. How the benefit works is the first year in retirement, you would receive 100% of your AFC as a one-time lump sum payment to your beneficiary. Now, this would be in addition to any service retirement benefit you receive. Now, each year thereafter in retirement, it does decrease by 15%, until in the 5th year it reaches a base amount of 40%. And that 40% of your average final compensation is going to be available no matter how long you live. So if you live to be 102 years old and pass away at that time, 40% of your high 3-year average, that average final compensation, will be paid as a one-time lump sum to your beneficiary at that point. So know that it's out there. If you're delaying your effective date, please do contact Survivor Services, talk to your employer, so you don't see that money lost on a technicality. That's everything I needed to touch on today. If there's any questions, anything I can clarify,